How big of a meat grinder is too big for those of us that aren't a commercial butcher? Today we're looking at the 2 horsepower grinder from Meet Your Maker, and to say that this thing is huge is a complete understatement. I'm David Gafford, and here at the Barbecue Lab, we test over 70 different outdoor cooking appliances every year to help you make educated buying decisions. Today we're going to grind a whole brisket into burgers with friends, grind a pork butt and make some pork chorizo, and walk through if this is more than enough meat grinder to fulfill your wildest culinary future plans. Let's start by taking a walk through the 2 horsepower grinder to see what it's made of. I want to walk you through what comes with the 2 horsepower grinder when you get it. Let's start with the stuffing horns. So you'll see there's an adapter here. This fits on the end of the unit, and then you have 3 different sizes of stuffing horns for sausages. You have a large, medium, and a small. Those come with it out of the box. Now, one of the things that's nice is that there's a drawer right here that you can store all of that in, as well as this plunger. Now, the plunger, you use this to be able to make sure that you're getting all of your meat down inside into the auger. That's what the plunger is. You have this blade that goes with the sausage stuffing horn. That's what you use this with. There are 2 grinder plates. This is the more coarse of the 2. First thing we'll take off is the grinder locking nut. This is what actually keeps everything inside the unit. Then we have the smaller diameter plate. Now I showed you the large plate, and there's the small plate. So we have both of those that come with the unit right out of the box. Next is the knife, and this knife is what actually gives us all of our cutting. It rotates with the auger. Then we have the auger itself, and this thing is very weighty, very heavy. Incredibly large auger. The rest of this is pretty self-explanatory. You have the meat tray, which is connected with this little knob right here, the screw that comes in to connect it pretty easy. Next, we have the grinder throat attachment, and you can see how large, how wide around this is right here. It's incredibly large. Then you have the grinder motor itself, and this thing is gigantic. Power is down here. It's a simple flip switch for on and off. And other than that, you have a power cable on this side. That's about all there is to it. Not a whole lot to this machine, but it sure is a beast. One thing I wanted to show you is a size comparison between the 2 horsepower and the 1 horsepower. This is the 1 horsepower dual grind grinder from Meet Your Maker. This is the 2 horsepower grinder, and you can see the obvious size difference between the 2. Just looking here at the end, you can see the grinder plate on each, the size of them. This one is easily half the size of this one. You can see the throat on this as opposed to the throat on this, how much wider this is in comparison to this one. And the motor itself, just simply much, much larger. So you're talking about a massive beast of a unit here in the 2 horsepower. And for most people, this 1 horsepower dual grind is still gonna be a little bit of overkill. So unless you're doing really almost commercial levels of grinding, that's what this is for. This thing is massive. All right, so we're gonna test the meat grinder. I've got all the guys here. They're just off camera. You'll see them here in a little bit. But we have this 14.17 pound brisket that we're gonna take and trim into meat and fat to get our ratio for grinding these burgers that we're gonna do tonight for our group. So I'm gonna go ahead and crack this thing open, and we're gonna start cutting this up into pieces to grind this up. But that's how our test is gonna go. One of the things, I was talking to the manufacturer of this grinder, and one of the things he said was, hey, make sure you use any fat to lubricate the machine first before you try running meat. And I was like, interesting idea. Okay, looking at this, it says we've got about 5.3 pounds of our fat in here, not including the bowl. So I want to go ahead and dump this out, find out how much the bowl weighs. It'll give us a full idea of how much fat we really have here. We have 4.1 pounds of fat to work with. Now let's go ahead and get a measurement on how much meat we have. We have 9 pounds, 15 ounces. So we're gonna say 10 pounds of meat. So 10 pounds of meat, 4 pounds of fat, which means our ratio was what? It was like 60-40 is pretty much what we were working with on this one. So what we can do is we can go ahead and look at the fat and say, what do we want to use for lubricating the machine? And what do we want to use to incorporate in this? Some of the nasty bits we'll use to lubricate. Some of the other stuff we'll put in here as part of our fat grind. But let's go ahead and get this thing sliced up and turn the grinder on. We have things separated to an 80-20 mix, and I have in here some of the extra fat that we're not gonna use. We're gonna use that to lubricate the grinder, and we're gonna stick this in here. I've got my buddy Chris here who's gonna help us feed everything through the grinder. So we're gonna start by feeding this through, getting that out of the way, and then we're gonna go ahead and do a mixture of everything else, and we'll see how this thing does. All right, there is our ground fat after lubricating the machine. This will go away, but now it's time to go ahead and bring the tub in, and we're gonna go ahead and take the brisket and our little bit of fat, our 80-20 mixture, and we're gonna let Chris bring it to life. Now we have our 80-20, here we go. One of the things I wanted to know is if you actually took the flat and just cut it in long strips instead of 1-inch cubes, would it still work in this thing? And I just thought, let's test it and find out. So I'm gonna go ahead and let Chris take these whole pieces of the flat that are cut into about 2 or 2.5 inch wide swaths and stick them in here and see how it does. So let's give that a shot. All right, so there is our almost 12 or 13 pounds of ground brisket at 80-20. It looks pretty good. If you look in here, you can see that we still have some places where the fat is pretty prevalent, so we need to hand mix this just a little bit, but I still think this is gonna make some excellent burgers for tonight. All right, so here's the consensus we came to. And by consensus, I mean Melissa came up with this idea. What we're gonna do is we're gonna mix up the fat and we're gonna mix up the meat, and we're gonna go ahead and take half of it and we're gonna double grind it, and half of it we won't. Run it as burgers and see what we come up with, which one we liked better. All right, grind number 2. Shoving. All right, so here is the double ground brisket. And then on the other side, I'm gonna go ahead and dump this other brisket so you can see the two in comparison. All right, here's the two. This is our double ground. This is our single ground. You can see the definitive difference between these two. The consensus from the guys between the single grind and the double grind was that the single grind got a little crispier on the outside than the double grind did. But the single grind also fell apart when the double grind did not. So in the future, we're going to opt for the double grind because it holds it together and overall was just a little bit better. In a second, we're going to grind a whole pork butt and make some pork chorizo. But before we do, I want to pass a question off to you. Tell me in the comments what your main use for a meat grinder would be. Are you a hunter who's processing wild game, or are you buying whole muscles from the store and making your own sausages from scratch? What would you use it for? I'd love to hear your use cases down in the comments. We're gonna go ahead and make some pork chorizo using the 2 horsepower grinder. And we picked up this pork butt from our local grocery store. It's about 9.5 pounds of pork butt. I'm gonna go ahead and get this cubed up and ready for the grinder. Now you'll notice that I don't have the rest of the pieces of the grinder here. That's because they're outside because it's about 15 degrees today. And we're putting them outside to get them nice and cold to help keep our meat cold when we grind it. So let's get this cubed up and we'll see how this works. We have the pork trimmed in pieces that's about the right size to go through the grinder. I also took off some of the extra fat because this is, I could go ahead and use it, but I don't want super fatty chorizo. I'm good with this ratio of lean to fat. So we're gonna go grab the other parts out of the cold, bring them in, and let's turn this into ground pork. A lot of people ask me how you put one of these together. We're gonna start with the grinder head, and we're gonna go ahead and stick that in, get it nestled in. Then we take our screw knob, put that in the hole, and we're gonna use that to attach this down and make sure that we are solid. That's good to go. Now, inside of the grinder head, there is a nylon sleeve. That is right here inside this throat piece that's already connected to the grinder head itself. Next, we take our auger, and our auger is gonna go in, and I like to use my hand in here to be able to help position it, make sure that your machine is unplugged and turned off. But I'm gonna go ahead and put my hand in here so I can lift it in place and get it nice and settled in there. Next, we take the knife and we're gonna let the curvature of the knife go on this way. So we're gonna take this, stick it on the front, let that get nestled in. Then we have our grinding plate. And if you look at the bottom of the grinding plate, you'll see a little notch here that aligns with a notch on the bottom of the grinder head. And so you start by aligning that, then push this on, and it should fit right on there. Now, if it doesn't fit right on, you need to lift up the auger and get it into place. That's one of the things that's the limiting factor here, is making sure that your auger is high enough so you can get this settled in. And there we go. Last thing is the wheel nut, and the wheel nut goes on the outside here to hold everything together. And one of the secrets that I found is that you don't tighten this incredibly tight. You get it on so it holds everything together, but you don't want it to be over tight, or you're gonna potentially be putting metal on metal as you push those super, super tight together. Get it in there, get it a little snug, but make sure that you're not over tightened, and then you'll decrease the option of metal to press against each other as you're grinding. Last thing is our meat tray, and we attach that on top here. But one of the things I want to point out is look how wide the throat is on this unit, incredibly wide. And if you look here at the top, you can see the protective piece that's going to keep us from sticking our hand down here. Now, if you look on this side, you can see the size disparity there. That protective piece to keep us from sticking anything way too big down there is greatly going to limit how much we can put in. And so that's a safety feature that really helps, but it also limits how much you can do. So interesting decision there. I understand why, but at the same time, there's a lot more capability in this unit without that safety feature on there, but it also increases the danger factor. So I have to say, do not take that off, but at the same time, it does get in the way. First things first, we have our meat stomper handy to make sure that we can press everything down. And I also have a set of tongs to make sure I can retrieve anything that I need to. But I'm gonna go ahead and start by taking all of our meat, putting it in our meat tray. And then we're ready to roll. Let's go ahead and see how long it takes us to go ahead and get all of this done. All right, let's go ahead and turn it on and see how it goes. So during that first grind, we went ahead and put the decibel meter on, and we're getting right around 73 decibels while we're grinding pork is the noise that this machine makes. So about 73 dB is the report on the 2 horsepower. We went ahead and have the first grind done. We're gonna take all of this, put it back in, get a second grind on it, then we'll mix in our seasonings. All right, second grind. All right, so that's it. Nice homogeneous looking grind here. We're getting a lot better mixture on the second grind. I think we're ready to add some chorizo mix in, and this is gonna be done. But super easy, doing an entire pork butt in no time at all. Okay, Melissa just asked the question, how much gets left inside? Let's go ahead and do a little exploration and see how much is left inside the auger. If we go ahead and get all this out, make sure you turn it off before you do any of this. So we're gonna go ahead and unplug it. Make sure that that's off. Then we can go ahead and pull our auger out. And you can see there's a little bit. Of course, we have what's left in the die press itself. Then here around the front of the auger, here's about how much is left around that wheel. So we've got about, oh, I don't know, I'd say probably maybe 3.5 ounces or so that was left inside. So we went ahead and pulled out whatever hadn't gotten ground in that second grind, and we have that right here. We're gonna go ahead and start by putting that down in the grinder, and I'm gonna go ahead and take a handful of the stuff that did get double ground and chase it with that so we know that we have meat that is all usable in this, this grind for this cook. That should be good to go, so let's go ahead and turn this on and grind the rest. So now we'll go ahead and clean this out, and we know the stuff that is stuck in there has already been ground twice, so we're good to go to use all of it for our chorizo. Our pork is chilled, and we have our chorizo seasoning right here. This is about 3/4 cup of our chorizo seasoning. I have about 6 pounds of the ground pork here. We're just gonna take this, mix it in, and we are going to get our chorizo finished up. And I think we're even gonna have some for dinner, but let's mix this up, see how it looks. All right, there we have it. We have some chorizo. It's going to be a delicious dinner. So how easy was it making chorizo from a full pork butt? It really didn't take that long. This thing is incredibly fast with how well it just demolishes meat into this ground meat incredibly fast. So no issues with that whatsoever. If you want to try this chorizo recipe yourself, you can get this exact mixture on our website over at thebarbecuelab.com. I'll leave a link down in the description below so you can try this for yourself. It's time for some final thoughts on the 2 horsepower meat grinder. Let's start by stating the obvious. This is a huge meat grinder. The throat on this machine is so wide, you can grind an incredible amount of meat in a short period of time. The safety guard does greatly limit how much you can put down the throat at one time though, so it cuts down what it's capable of by a good amount, but it does keep you safe while using it. Compared to the 1 horsepower dual grind machine, there's a pretty sizable difference here. When you put them side by side, you can see the scale that we're talking about with this 2 horsepower unit compared to the already large 1 horsepower dual grind. There is some real utility that comes in the box with these grinders with multiple sizes of stuffing horns to make links without a separate stuffer. Now my preference is to use a dedicated stuffer, but if you're on a budget, this comes ready to make that happen. Now, I think this model is overkill for what we do. We're grinding briskets into burgers, trimmings into ground meats, and I'm just getting into hunting, so I'm not fully utilizing it for that purpose yet. I think this is really for someone that has a hunting cabin where multiple hunters are going to gather during hunting season and process all of their wild game together. This is really perfect for large-scale meat processing. If you're just grinding briskets and pork butts at home, the 1 horsepower dual grind is more than up to the task at half the price. You can find links to all of the gear that you've seen in this video down in the description below, as well as a discount code that you can use on the meat website to save yourself some money. I'm David, behind the camera is Melissa, and we can't wait to see you on the next one.